What's going on, everybody? Hope you're having an amazing day. As always, you can follow me on Instagram at DreamRare. That's at DreamRare. You can follow me on Twitter at Legendary Energy. Check out my website for more. It's legendary.vision. I have a podcast. I have a bunch of stuff on there. Hip hop, poetry, news analysis, and you could contact me for any sort of reason. I'm gonna wait about 5 or 10 more seconds for people to come into the live stream, and I want to do a pretty in-depth and what I consider to be a very fair and open-minded analysis on what's been going on in Syria the past 6.5 years, what's going on there now, and I'm just gonna wait about 5 or 10 more seconds for people to get in. So just give me 1 second. As always, DreamRare on Instagram, Twitter is Legendary Energy, and my website is legendary.vision. So there's a report today in all the major mainstream news publications that Russia, Turkey, and Iran met together as a three-way summit to talk about a peace situation in Syria. The Syrian war has been going on for 6.5 years, and it got extra confusing and extra controversial, especially here in America, because at a certain point, the United States got involved in the war in Syria, and in that time, they were trying to overthrow the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad. Now, the report from the UN and from many major mainstream publications was that Bashar al-Assad had used chemical weapons on his own people. So that was the United States reasoning to go into Syria and to try to, I guess, kill or dethrone the president of Syria. Now, that strategy has proved very unsuccessful in multiple other countries, including Iraq and Syria. Most famously, in Iraq, the United States did something similar to Saddam Hussein, and in Libya, the United States did something similar to Gaddafi. And in Libya, I do want to remind people it is much, much, much worse today, and there's actually literal slavery and literal slave trade in Syria, because that's what happens when you just kill somebody's leader and leave an entire power vacuum, especially in certain regions of the Middle East where ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups have somewhat power. So in Syria, during the Obama administration, with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State and John McCain as whatever position he gave himself, or I don't even know if it was elected, but he's always taking trips back and forth to Syria, their strategy was to arm and fund the moderate rebels in Syria. So that's what was happening before the Trump administration came in. They were funding and arming, admittingly, this is not just my opinion, that's their strategy, was giving millions upon possibly billions of dollars, you'll have to look up the exact amount, giving them to moderate rebels who were then trying to overthrow the president Bashar al-Assad of Syria. There's only one problem. Over the last 4 or 5 years or so, ISIS has become stronger and stronger and stronger in Syria, and it's almost like we had learned nothing from Iraq and from Libya. I understand, I don't know Bashar al-Assad, I don't know if he truly used chemical weapons on his people. You'll have to do the research. The UN says he does. A lot of reporters that I trust say that Bashar al-Assad did use chemical weapons on his people, and many independent journalists said he never did. It's a false flag, and the United States used it as an excuse to launch an attack. You can come to that conclusion of yourself. I have my suspicions, but even among a leader like a Bashar al-Assad or a Saddam Hussein or a Gaddafi, even if they are doing terrible things to their people, we're not the police of the world. And if we are the police of the world, this is just my perspective, we at least have to be good police. Being a good policeman doesn't mean taking a bad region where there's corruption and crime, killing the leader, and then letting it be a power vacuum for the most disturbing, disgusting, terrible terrorist groups to take over. And that actually happened in Syria before the Trump administration took over. ISIS gained control of major cities in Syria, including Damascus, and I believe one more, if not multiple more, but that's one of the biggest and most popular cities in Syria. ISIS had complete control. So what you don't hear on the news when they say a travel ban, while I agree it might have been too strict at times, and there might have been certain regions that it didn't include, that it could have possibly included, but what the news never told you is that in Iraq and Syria, among other places, and in Libya, apparently, it's awful there, ISIS and other terrorist groups had complete control of the cities. So if you're an intelligent country, why would you be wanting free flow travels to cities and countries where the worst terror group in the entire world literally controls the city? So that's what the news never told you. They say everything's racist, sexist, and xenophobic, almost so we can't have a real conversation about what's going on, so we can't save lives and determine what is true racism, what is true xenophobia and sexism, and what's actually not, what's just their failed foreign policies. So once the Trump, I'm walking you through the timeline, and we'll get to today where Russia, Turkey, and Iran are trying to put together a peace treaty. So this is all happening. They're funding moderate rebels. John McCain loves it. Hillary Clinton loves it. Obama loves it. The Bushes love it. All the politicians, the Democrats and the Republicans, they're pretty much probably the only two people that spoke out against it in the entire U.S. government was Tulsi Gabbard, Democratic Congresswoman of Hawaii, and Rand Paul, who is a Republican, but, anti-intervention, anti-war. So during the election, Donald Trump says, you know what? I don't like this foreign policy. We killed Saddam. We killed Gaddafi. We left a huge power vacuum where there's literal slave trade going on in Libya today. And you could watch videos of Hillary Clinton bragging about killing Gaddafi. She thinks it's the funniest thing that there's slavery literally existent today. Meanwhile, Twitter's talking about hipster racism from Lena Dunham. It's like they don't want to address the real issues and the real victims in the world. But Trump had a bold idea. He said, you know what, I'm going to go against the military-industrial complex. Before President Donald Trump, whether you love him or hate him, whether you're offended by him or whether you think what he's doing is great, that's your personal interpretation, and I respect that. But he is one of the first presidents to ever have his own agenda of sorts. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, John McCain, they're all the same person. They're all doing the same things. There's very little difference between them when it comes to foreign policy. It's kind of like George Carlin said, it's one big team or whatever he said, and you're not part of it. Well, President Trump said, I don't want to do that. I see what's happening in Syria, and he saw that ISIS was taking over. So he's like, instead of fighting Russia and fighting Syria, because at a certain point in the Syrian war, we're funding rebels to overthrow Syria, the United States is. We want to, take over their country. And Russia came in and started helping Syria and aiding Syria. And apparently Iran started aiding, and possibly even Turkey. You'll have to, once again, further look. So countries that we don't get along with, like Iran, and countries like Russia who we don't get along with. Although I will say, before the last 2 years, you heard nothing about us not getting along with Russia. Mitt Romney campaigned on, we got to watch out for Russia. And you could literally Google Mitt Romney, Russia, during his election. The same press that pushes this McCarthyism, Russia-phobia, xenophobia, scare tactics to try to push their agenda, they were making fun of Mitt Romney for talking about Russia being a threat. And Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama's administration, and, whatever officials were part of it, sold 20% of the United States uranium for a quid pro quo. There's many reports that say over $130 million flowed to the Clinton Foundation directly, while she's giving up 20% of the United States uranium to Russia. And there's going to be more and more reports going to come out. This is what was once considered a conspiracy and a lie. PolitiFact lied about it, Snopes lied about it, but it's going to become common household knowledge very soon, because you can't hide such a big truth. When you're pushing this Russia scare and you're the biggest culprit of selling the United States uranium to Russia, there's only so long you can get away with a house of cards, lies stacked on top of lies. So to get back to the Syria story, we're funding rebels to overthrow Syria. It's once like Iraq and like Libya, and I'm not saying they were perfect. I'm not saying I have the solutions. That's why I tell you both sides of the story, and I say come to your own conclusions. Too many news analysts are, egotistical and ideologues where everything should be perfect. War should stop today. It's the United States' fault. It's Saudi Arabia's fault. It's Israel's fault. And if we all stop, the world would be a peaceful place. It's just not true. It might feed somebody's ego, and, they're an ideologue. They think they can stop all the wars in the world, but they truly can't. Most news analysts will not tell you the truth. That's why I'm letting you come to your own conclusions. But of course, based on my analysis, I'm leaning in a certain way, as you can see, just based on all the information that I've read. So we're funding rebels to overthrow Syria, and Russia comes in, potentially Iran comes in, Turkey comes in, Israel's shooting missiles at like a couple months ago. I guess they're on our side. I'm not really sure. But we are just ruining a lot of things. To be honest, like whatever we're doing, we're fighting Syria. Syria's fighting ISIS. There's even reports in Newsweek today that say that Putin says that the United States has been funding terrorism, and it's not just Putin. They put this Russia blanket on everything to just blind your eyes and think it's a sports game. It's not just Putin. Like you say Putin, Russia, Alex Jones, Trump, and all logic goes out the window. People will oppose anything that Trump, Alex Jones, or Putin says, just being honest. But when it comes to if the United States was funding terrorism or not, there's many American journalists as well. It's not just Russian journalists. There's many American journalists who went and did investigative journalism and said the same thing. They said it's not only that the United States is messing things up and funding rebels, and then you have Syria fighting ISIS, and the truth is ISIS started taking over. And my suspicion is, okay, we have the biggest military budget, bigger than the next 5 to 10 countries combined. We have an air force. We have all this power. We have hundreds of bases all over the world. And we're letting ISIS, which is not that powerful of a terrorist organization, they don't even have an air force, they don't have a navy force or anything that we do. How are we letting them grow in Syria? In my personal perspective, I would think that a military as strong as ours, with the technological capabilities of pretty much being able to track anyone at any time and having all these weapons and all these tanks, I would think that they were purposely letting terrorism spread, because if we didn't want things to spread like terrorism, I would think that we would be able to stop it a lot easier. And there's also a story that came out, it was in the major publications, that the United States was paying hundreds of millions of dollars to a British PR firm. You could Google this and check it out. The Daily Beast wrote about it, as well as a few other liberal and mainstream news organizations. The United States was paying $100+ million to a British PR firm to make fake Al-Qaeda and fake ISIS videos. So, like propaganda videos without the real ones. So if terrorism is truly rampant and there's really so many examples of terrorism, why would you need to pay $100+ million to a British PR firm to essentially stage video footage when there's a lot of real video footage? I get it. Maybe I'll be open-minded. Maybe there's a possibility that it was a more effective way or whatever, but in my opinion, seems a little sketchy. So fast forward, President Trump gets in office. He does, like with pretty much everything, whether you love him or hate him, he does exactly what he said he was going to do. He stopped the covert, intelligence communities. You can put the pieces together who that is. The intelligence communities were funding the moderate rebels, and Trump overturned their policy of funding moderate rebels. This is a fact. This really happened. The Washington Post, the New York Times, and all of the mainstream anti-Trump publications pitched it as a Putin thing. That's how they pretty much dumb everything down. Whether you love him or hate him, that's not for me to decide. But what is the truth is logic, common sense, reality. It doesn't matter to these people. If they throw Trump or Putin onto something, then anybody who hates Trump automatically hates Putin, thinks he's working with Putin, and will, not be able to analyze any sort of reality, because Trump, Putin, that's how they get you. They pitched it as, oh, Trump's working with Putin, now he's working with Russia. And this is something that he campaigned on. He said, I don't want to do regime change in Syria. And to be honest, this isn't a Republican viewpoint, whether you agree with it or not. I know there's some liberals and some conservatives that don't agree with it, whatever. This is not a right-wing standpoint. This is a Green Party standpoint. This is like a far left and a very liberal, environmentalist, social justice warrior standpoint. What President Trump did in no way, shape, or form is right-wing. In no way, shape, or form is it pro-military industrial complex. And once again, I'm not saying Trump is the be-all, end-all. I know he didn't stop all wars at once, and he didn't stop dropping bombs. He did the opposite in a few occasions. But what he did do was went against the military industrial complex plan, which, according to generals who worked for George Bush, they've had planned for the 10 or 15 years. A lot of these wars, while they seem random to us, there's generals who worked side by side with George Bush Jr. that says that 7 of these countries were mapped out and planned. So you have to understand how huge of news this was. It pretty much went out of the news cycle in a day. And whether you agree with it or disagree with it, love it or hate it, it's one of the biggest stories of the year, going against the intelligence communities. And when they were making the big story about, oh, Trump doesn't want to go to intelligence meetings, it's because they were trying to tell him things that he didn't want to do. He already had his mind made up about what he wanted to do in Syria. So Trump overturns the intelligence community policy of funding moderate rebels, and within 3 or 4 months, ISIS is almost completely kicked out of Syria. Damascus, one of the biggest cities in Syria, ISIS doesn't have a stronghold on it. The Syrian government, with the help of Russian and possibly Iran and Turkey, they took back their cities from ISIS, and that's who CNN and all of these publications have been claiming we've been fighting for 8 years. So you would think that they would give President Trump some credit. You would think they would give the United States some credit, but it's the exact opposite story. And I do also want to point out, and you could Google and fact check this all day, hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees went back to Syria in the last year. So you have hundreds of thousands of refugees going back to their country because it's now safe, because ISIS doesn't own certain cities. And the mainstream media warped and twisted this to seem like the worst thing in the world. The whole reason I'm even speaking about this, that what sparked my inspiration, was I was reading in the LA Times at a coffee shop that the LA Times called this a huge embarrassment for the United States. So this is the level of media manipulation that you endure, not only on a mainstream level like with New York Times and Washington Post and CNN and MSNBC and Newsweek and even Fox News, in the past, and pretty much every publication, they're titling this an embarrassment for the United States. While I can understand what they're maybe alluding to, and I'll get to that as we go on, but nowhere did they talk about hundreds of thousands of refugees going back to Syria. I have a friend, Treka. He does comedy. I've shared his videos before. He lives in Syria, and he said it's gotten way better over the past year because the United States stopped funding terrorism. That's his personal perspective. I'm sure there's other people in Syria with different perspectives, but it seems like the United States was indirectly funding terrorism during the Obama administration with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State and John McCain as unelected Syrian official, or whatever position that no one gave him. So you have to understand how serious this is. When you talk about the fact that Libya is so destroyed, is such a failed state, that there's literally slave trade in Libya. There's people trading slaves in 2017. That's unacceptable. That never would have happened under Gaddafi. I'm not saying Gaddafi was perfect or great. There's many reports that he was changing to a gold-backed currency and that he was giving everybody a house and education. So there are people who say Gaddafi was actually a great leader, and that's why they hated him. I'm not here to tell you that or shove that down your throat. I definitely think there's a possibility that Gaddafi was doing some bad things as well. But the truth is, it got way, way worse there. And they were trying to do the same thing in Syria. And they disguise all of this stuff as social justice, as liberalism, when the modern day Democrats and the modern day liberals, that's why I say what I say. When people wonder, Anomaly, how could you do this? How could you support Trump? How could you post Donald Trump Jr.? This is why. Because this is how far real liberalism, I'm a classic liberal. I want peace, I want love, I want unity, I want compassion, I want understanding. I'm the real liberal. The fake liberals are the ones who believe anything anti-Trump and anything anti-Putin, and Trump is Putin and Putin's Trump and everything we've done. When it's admitted in their emails, the only reason that they brought that up was because they knew that they had the biggest connections to Russia, because they had just a year or two later done this massive illegal deal between back channels selling 20% of the United States uranium to Russia. And this is all coming out. It's all going to come out. I've been saying it for a year. I've been trying to tell people and explain what's really going on. And people don't want to hear it because they've turned the United States into a reality TV show. And I don't watch television. Maybe that's why I'm not so brainwashed and manipulated by popular culture, because I don't let that type of energy into my life. But they're trying to convince the same people that they make watch reality television and all of these fake scripted shows and all of these fake movies that are scripted. I'm not hating, that's just what they are. They're not real. They're literally scripts and fake actors who pretend to be other people. They've convinced people that the United States in the world stage is a show. And to an extent, it is a show and a game. It's a chess game and it is a show. But they think they're the almighty God. They think they're the almighty rulers of the flow of information. They think they're so powerful that they could flip any story. If they publish it in the news, they could smear anybody, they could turn anybody into the villain, and they could turn anybody into the hero. And they're doing it right now with Putin and Trump. I'm not saying Trump's perfect. I'm not saying Putin's perfect. But everything Trump does is not bad. Quite the contrary. He's done more in 9 months than any president's done in a long, long time. Even if I disagree with certain things, his rebellion and the fact that he's not bought out by the pharmacy companies and he can't be controlled by the lobbyists and he can't be controlled by Washington, he's not a puppet. Even when I disagree with a decision he makes, you notice he changes his decision. When it came to DACA, he learned that a lot of the DACA kids were good kids and they were pursuing education, and he tweeted out to his fan base, he said, hey, listen, these are good kids. I'm not going to send good Mexican kids back to Mexico. They're going to stay in America. No one gave him credit for that. Everyone was freaking out about the elephant poaching and whatnot. People freaked out. His fan base told him, hey, Trump, you should overlook this and make sure this isn't hurting animals and, destroying, animal lives in a negative way. And Trump said, hey, you know what? I'm going to relook at this and make a new decision. He's not a puppet. He's actually the greatest, probably kindest, most compassionate president we've had. But that's how popular the media is. They can tell you who the hero is. They can tell you who the villain is. If Barack Obama's cool, funny, smiling, and, appealing to people, he can do anything. They could sell the United States uranium. They can fund terrorism, and nobody cares. That's how powerful the news is. And that's why I do what I do. When people don't understand it, and not that the haters even deserve this 20 seconds of my time, but I'm going to give it because that's the type of person I am. This isn't an echo chamber where I want to talk to people who agree. I want to make a pitch to people that disagree with me. This is why I do everything I do, because that's the true state of liberalism. The modern state of liberalism has been hijacked by the mainstream media to actually be extreme right-wing and extreme left-wing. They're turning modern-day liberalism and modern-day feminism and modern-day social justice into literal extremism. So when people shoot up a church or shoot up a country concert or break Rand Paul's ribs, I'm not surprised, because they're breeding a bunch of extremists using the hate for Vladimir Putin, the hate for Donald Trump, and the hate for Republicans and conservatives, to the point where you can convince a bunch of liberals that regime change is a good idea. And when Trump is the first president to do what every Green Party person and every liberal has been begging for the past 20, 30 years, President Donald Trump did that. He did the most liberal thing. He ended the regime change war in Syria. And guess what happened? It worked. Hundreds of thousands of people went back to Syria. Now they own their own cities, and we don't have to worry about a travel ban. This is how, before I get back to it, this is how sick and disgusting the media is. That all they do is call the travel ban racist, and if you don't want to take in refugees, you're racist, when it's the politicians that they supported and act as a giant PR shield for these politicians. It's those politicians who made the refugees. That's how dumbed down a lot of modern day liberals are, and progressives, and even Republicans. It's whoever believes this news, you're dumbed down, because they've created a refugee crisis. They convinced you that everybody should come to the United States, that anybody who runs across the border illegally should stay here, and that's totally okay, when it's not okay, when you let enough of your population turn into a population of a failed state, or radicalization of a religion, or a place where they're gang raping people, and there's crimes and drugs and federales and police and people killing each other because the rule of law doesn't really exist in Mexico. What do you think is going to happen to your country? So that's how sick and disgusting the news is. They created the refugee crisis by being a giant PR shield for multiple regime change wars, and then they convinced modern day liberals to be like, we got to let them in or we're bad people. No, it's those politicians who made refugees. And then a bunch of Syrians go back to their home. Hundreds of thousands of people migrate back to their home country, and nobody says a word. The anti-Trump crowd said nothing. Liberals said nothing. Progressives said barely anything. Green Party, Jill Stein, said barely anything, because these people are not real environmentalists. They're not real social justice activists. They're just liars trying to push their agenda. Bernie Sanders wants to push socialism. I'm not trying to knock him in this podcast, but He doesn't care about all these things that people care about. He cares about socialism. Jill Stein, she doesn't care about regime change wars and the fact that hundreds of thousands of... She cares about her agenda. And without identity politics, without pushing race, religion, and gender... And I voted for Jill Stein. I regret it now because after a year, I see who she really is. She doesn't care about any of this stuff I'm talking about. Even Tulsi Gabbard, who I love and support, who was talking about regime change war for years, and she was saying, we got to leave Syria alone, we got to leave Syria alone. She was on CNN. She barely said anything about it. If she was on Fox News, she said something about it on Tucker Carlson, but then she didn't even post about it on her Facebook and her Twitter. So how much do these people really care about the issues that they talk about? I mean, this is why I don't support politicians, because they're all phonies. I mean, when something that they've been begging for 20 years happens, it's like they're quiet. They need more chaos. They need more fear. If I just dissed everybody and hated on people all the time, I would probably be way more successful and popular, be getting booked for all these things. But I don't do that because it's not about fame or politics to me. It's about the truth. I don't care about left or right. Where's the truth? And the truth is, Donald Trump did what a lot of people haven't. So back to that story. He ended the funding of the moderate rebels. People went back to Syria. ISIS is basically non-existent. Even if you read every single mainstream media article today, no matter what they're telling you about Putin and Trump and Syria, almost all of them will tell you that ISIS is going to be eliminated. So once again, this is another thing that Trump said he would do. Under the Obama administration, I was not very critical of Obama. I'm not an Obama hater, and I don't blame everything in the world on Obama. I'm not that person, just for people joining. ISIS grew and grew and grew and grew and grew and took over like a lot of part of the Middle East. They weren't shrinking, they were growing. They were not even, I mean, Al-Qaeda was the thing when Bush was in. Obama gets in and it's ISIS this, ISIS that, all of a sudden they're growing. Trump gets in and he does exactly what he said he's going to do. He kicked ISIS out because his policy was to work with Russia and stop funding terrorists. I mean, it's really that simple. If you don't fund the terrorists, they don't take over the cities. And if you don't fund rebels who somehow, squander their weapons to terrorists, then it's pretty easy to keep them under control. So here's the flip side, though. Because, like I said, I'm going to keep it open and I'm going to explore all possibilities. I'm not an ideologue. It's easy. I would say 99% of news analysts, they act like they know everything. And if they don't get their way, everybody's wrong. And we got to stop the wars tomorrow. And if we don't stop the wars, you're a terrible president. Trump's a billionaire who's out for himself. That's what all the other news analysts, they're going to lie to you. They're going to act like they're the all-being gods that know how to solve a massively multi-layered complex that includes religion, it includes power, it includes money, it includes multiple countries, it includes politicians, it includes secret backdoor deals that we don't even have any idea about. So that's the truth. And on the flip side, where this could be harmful is now you have Bashar al-Assad, who is allied with Russia. You have Iran and you have Turkey, two countries who we don't have the greatest relationship with. Now they are having more power and control in Syria. It is to be finessed. I don't think we should go in and take over, someone's country and destroy their entire country. But at the same time, we do have to be careful of Iran, Russia, and Turkey getting too much power and control, because I don't know how much we can truly trust, their intentions. And nobody knows that more than President Trump. He called Iran funders and supporters of terrorism. So I would think that he knows that now Iran and Russia and Turkey are, getting more control in Syria. So that's the full circle story that nobody's telling you, and even to the point where they're calling it a failure. Like hundreds of thousands of Syrians, now millions of Syrians being free from radical terrorism. ISIS over the last year has gone from owning and controlling all their cities to being virtually non-existent. And like President Trump said, whether you love them or hate them, they will be destroyed. Their power structures in these countries will not exist. They're already almost non-existent and completely kicked out of Syria. And this all happened in under a year. So that shows you what possibly they were truly doing for, the past year or two. My personal analysis, now that I've showed you both sides and been as open-minded and fair as I could be, I do think that the John McCains, the Obama and Hillarys were funding literal terrorists, because I personally, from all the data that I've researched, I think that's somewhat of their strategy, is funding terrorists, have the terrorists go mess stuff up, and then they can come in, enrich themselves, steal people's money, sell off United States stuff, take the opium, take their resources, take their gold, take their rice. It's happened all over the world. It's happened in Haiti. It's happening in Afghanistan. It's happening in Syria. So I do think that they knew what they were doing, because at what point do you have the biggest military and you can't stop, a minor terrorist group? I'm not even going to call them a major threat. They're not nearly as big as the United States government. We've been spending trillions of dollars to basically run and control the whole world. So the fact that they're non-existent within a year of Trump, it's not a coincidence. I know people that are chronic, leftists will say, oh, it's Obama and it has nothing to do with Trump, and, Trump can't possibly do anything good. To me, that's almost somewhat of a disorder. If you're so egotistical and narcissistic and so politically inclined to play this like a sports team, that you can't possibly fathom that President Trump could do something positive, or actually, like, the reason that Syria has changed is because of him. I mean, to me, that's somewhat of a disorder that you can't even fathom that. Because if it was Obama or Hillary or George Bush or somebody down the street, I would just be honest about it. Is that such a weird thing? Like, watch a debate and watch something happen and not play it like a sports team, be like, oh, they did better than I thought they would do. Like, I mean, at what point is the problem not the politicians? Is the problem us? We're the ones consuming the news. We're the ones spreading materialism. We're the ones spreading, a message of violence and hate. And you have the same celebrities and, music artists and politicians who all they talk is peace, love, unity, positivity. Meanwhile, they're either indirectly or directly supporting weapons, violence, terrorism, hate, negativity, misogyny, all of these things that they act like they're the saviors of. They're perpetuating via music, film, and in some cases, literally in real life. So the irony and the hypocrisy just never seems to end. Let me know what your thoughts are. I still don't know whether this is in the long term going to be good for the United States or not. I trust President Trump, and I do think that between Putin and Trump, how strong and aggressive that he is, that he can get a lot of things done, because I don't think for the longest time, this might not be the most popular mainstream thing to say, but the truth very rarely is. All the politicians before, all they did was stuff for money. There was very little integrity. It was all a big money game, and the world is a big money game. One of the best things about President Trump, whether he makes mistakes or succeeds, is he has so much money already, he doesn't need to enrich himself because he's already richer than the richest politician. It's actually a great thing. Left-leaning people will act like it's the worst thing in the world. It's not. Because when people come into this with like $10,000 to their name, they'll do anything for money. That's why the Clintons have hundreds of millions of dollars. Obama's net worth, certain news sources are saying he's at 40, 50 million. Where do you get all this money? If you didn't have it at first, you're enriching yourself. So, like the meme said, you had the Clintons and all the politicians of the past sacrificing America for their own personal wealth and for, situations that enrich them. President Trump seems to be the opposite. He's putting his wealth on the line. He's putting his character and his well-being. He's already sacrificed all of that, and he's got slaughtered by the media for it. He's doing that for his country. He's putting America first. I mean, that to me, that's been the whole problem ever. I don't agree with some of his words, but we're worrying about everybody else trying to be the world police, and we never worried about ourselves. Someone comes with like a spiritual truth of like, hey, we need to look in the mirror and focus on ourselves. And all of a sudden the press loses their mind because it's completely, opposite of their strategy of blaming, hating, and running all over the world, killing leaders, creating power vacuums, creating a refugee crisis, and then saying that everyone's racist if they want people to live in their own countries. Like, do people really think that everyone was born a